Hi, and welcome to the Frog Pond School of Design, where we like to talk about architecture, tell stories that relate to architecture. And today I want to talk about Sir Christopher Wren, who is probably the best known of British architects. But the interesting thing is, he didn't start out as an architect. He was a scientist and a mathematician and a professor at Oxford. But plague descended on London, and he decided to get out for a while. And he went to Paris, where he was influenced by the Baroque and by the work of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and came back to London prepared to do something about that. Kind of like Inigo Jones had done some 50, 60 years prior to him. Jones came back from Rome under the influence of Andrea Palladio, both his work and his writing. So between the two of them, they introduced a new classicism to Britain. But shortly, about the time Wren returned from Paris, the Great Fire hit London, 1666, and great portions of the city were destroyed. But it was a good opportunity for a young person wanting to practice architecture. And because of his background, he easily dominated the field and was commissioned to design 52 new churches to replace those that had been destroyed in the fire. And one of those, probably the best known, is St. Paul Cathedral, a grand edifice. You can see the neoclassical influence there that he brought back from the continent. But this isn't really what people think about when they think of Wren churches. They think about a more simple, straightforward style, something like this. This is a classic Wren church. This is St. Mary Aldermanbury. Now, it has an interesting history. The original St. Mary Aldermanbury dates to the 1100s, and that's the church that was destroyed in the fire. This is the church that Wren designed to replace it. Unfortunately, a couple hundred years went by, but in the Second World War, that church was firebombed during the German Blitz of London and destroyed again. And this time its fortunes didn't seem so positive because the area around the church had changed in nature over the time. There wasn't the residential aspect there, and they no longer really needed the parish. So for some time the church sat there in ruins. There was no reason to invest in the rebuilding of it at the time. But another thing happened too during the war around that time. A small college in Fulton, Missouri, decided to invite Winston Churchill to speak at their college. Now, what were the odds of getting someone of his stature at that particular time to come to the United States to speak in the middle of the country in a small town? Well, the odds are a little bit better if the president of the college has a friend who's a high-ranking military official in the U.S. and who says, I'll add a postscript to that invitation. That postscript said something along the lines of, I'd really like you to come and do this. It would mean a lot to me, particularly since this is in my home state, and I will personally introduce you. And it was signed, you know who it was signed by, Harry Truman. So Churchill came. Churchill spoke at this little college, Westminster College in the middle of Missouri. And during the speech, he used the line, an iron curtain has descended upon the continent. So this became Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. A lot of people know about that speech, but not so many people realize that it didn't take place in England. It took place in little old Fulton, Missouri. Sometime later, the folks in Fulton and at the college decided they should memorialize this event of Churchill coming to speak here. There were negotiations with the British government, and they were gifted the church in its pretty much destroyed condition, but they were able to dismantle what was left of it, bring it back here, replace stones with stones from the same quarry that the originals came from. They did a very thorough job of researching and reconstructing that church in Fulton, Missouri, and along with it developed a museum to commemorate the event. So we now have the American Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri, along with a genuine Christopher Wren church. It was quite an event, quite a turnaround going on there. The rest of the story is that I actually have a very small and very loose connection with this, because I mentioned the negotiations to get the church. One of the principal negotiators was a Scotsman who was an architect here in the States. At that time, he was at the University of Nebraska, and he kind of led the group in the negotiations with, since he was a subject of the crown, in the negotiations to get the church donated to the U.S. and to the Westminster College. He ended up being a professor of mine later on when he moved to a different university, let's say. So it's kind of interesting when one story leads to another, and this is how this whole thing came about. And Christopher Wren became noted for that type of church. This is a Christopher Wren church that's in Cape Cod here in the United States. There are a few, but there are an awful lot of churches of this style done by others. So the legacy of Christopher Wren was very significant, very broad, both in his home country in England and here in the United States. Hey, thanks for joining us today at the Frog Pond School of Design. I look forward to seeing you hanging around the pond again real soon.